How's it going, guys? Riv here, and today we review King Krule's third studio album, Man Alive. Now, King Krule is the alias of Archy Marshall. He first started making waves under the King Krule name with 6 Feet Beneath the Moon, and I was especially taken aback by his sophomore album, The Ooze, which saw Archie blending together trip-hop, jazz, prog rock, and post-punk, amongst other things. It was a record that really explored isolation and the weight the outside world could have on an individual in a pretty powerful way, I thought. Now, sonically, Man Alive is not too far removed from the Ooze. You'll still find Archie striking a delicate balance between raw energy and gentle soundscapes across his whole album. Where Man Alive breaks away, however, is in its subtle shift in tone, which we'll get to in a bit because I don't think it's immediately evident on the album. For example, on opening track Cellular, Archie shows still clear distress both in the inner and outer circles of his world, and although his performance is a tad underwhelming, I think it's still a wonderful introduction to the sound of this album, in the way different elements of white noise fade in and out of the mix, and tonally, it's a nice setup for the few songs that follow. Speaking of which, Stoned Again and Comet Face both carry out these themes of self-loathing and distress with a similar rough and raw energy. Stoned Again especially is a standout on the album, with its aggressive rhythmic ramblings of Archie as he reflects on his more naive days. And you can just hear the frustration in his voice as he talks about his own self-sabotage, and all of that is aided by a growling bass and just an overall anxious atmosphere. So it's both an unsettling and pretty catchy song. And as we move halfway down the track list, we get Alone Omen 3, which is the centerpiece of this album. Not because it's literally in the middle of the track listing, but because it marks a clear tonal shift in the album. Here we have Archie still acknowledging the low points many including himself have experienced, but he's putting a positive spin on it. He's encouraging self-discovery, he's sort of lifting the veil on the isolation we could put ourselves into, and all of this is complemented by some jazzy guitar work, a hypnotic drum beat, and I love that Archie's not afraid to cut out that beat near the end of the song to direct the attention toward his lyrics. It's just, overall, it's certainly one of the best tracks on the album. And before we talk about the more ambient cuts on here, let's talk about Drag On, because it carries with it sort of the same mellow tone as Alone Omen 3, at least instrumentally. The vocals are a bit sleepier, which turned me off at first, but in the context of the album, I've come to appreciate it more. Here we see Archie empathizing with those that find themselves in a place where he probably saw himself not too long ago, and his empathy is punctuated by one of the closing lines, which I'll put up here. And if you don't know, that lyric and the title of the song are a reference to Fantastic Planet, a French film that follows a race of small humans called Ohms that are basically kept as pets by blue giants known as drags, hence the title of the song. So, on one hand, it says something that Archie is willing to empathize with essentially the antagonists of the film, and it says another that he probably puts himself in the position of the Ohms, the race of humans oppressed by their environment. And I don't think the parallels end there. In terms of soundtrack and theme, I think Fantastic Planet clearly struck a chord with Archie. So film connoisseurs and King Krule fans alike, go check out Fantastic Planet. It's a wonderful film. But anyway, I didn't mean to take such a large detour. I apologize. Back to Man Alive. You'll find that the latter half of this album, as well as a few spots on the front half, feature more atmospheric, ambient songs, and they can honestly be a little hit or miss at times, so let's talk about the ones that really resonate with me first, starting with Airport Antinental Airplane, which features Archie speaking on escapism in a lot of ways. And I really like the pitched vocals here. They really quickly just catch the ear, and they add something nuanced to the mix. And overall, it just has this nice ebb and flow to it with this soft but punchy beat that phases in near the middle. It's just an easy, laid-back listen. And Underclass is perhaps the best song off of this album. It's definitely the jazziest cut off of here, with the bass line, the drum work, and a baritone sax on the chorus. It all just screams classic jazz. And in terms of melody and vocals, it's Archie's best performance on the album. And lyrically, it falls in line with the latter half here, with its discussion of finding solace in a hostile world. So, yeah, definitely give that a listen. I mean, obviously give the whole album a listen, but pay attention to Underclass in particular. And then Energy Fleets, once again, carries many of the same themes and caps them off with a whirlwind of sounds near the end, with guitars and horns alike, making this strong climax to an otherwise soft-spoken song. So, very well executed there. And so for the most part, the ambient tracks work for me. However, there are a handful of songs that feel as though they are purely ambiance and not much else. It's also on these tracks that Archy's vocals can get a bit too subdued. He seems to get lost in his own atmosphere sometimes, and thus I'm a bit lost as the listener. A couple of examples would be Theme for the Cross and Supermarché. Perfecto Miserable and Slinky would almost fit that same mold, if not for these big releases of tension near the end that I find pretty captivating. So overall, I think the album gets weighed down just a little bit by a few tracks that interrupt the flow with how they drag on, no pun intended. And overall, I'm not sure if I walk away as impressed as I was with the Ooze, even though that's not a perfect album either. But nonetheless, there is something to be said about the amount of maturity and the amount of growth in the songwriting here. In the track listing, I see an uphill battle between someone wanting to find comfort and hope in a world that has proven itself to be cold and sometimes unforgiving, and I think Archy gets that conflict across quite well. Right now, I'm feeling a 7 out of 10 on this album. Keep in mind when you're listening that this album is a grower. Honestly, upon first listen, I was feeling more like a 6 out of 10, but the album rewards the patient listener. So all of that is to say, give it a few listens before you make your own final judgment. And when you've done so, let me know your opinion in the comments. I openly invite it. And if you have any suggestions for what I should review in the future, leave those down there too. I know as a fact we'll be talking about The Strokes pretty soon, so if that sounds good, feel free to stick around and subscribe. Otherwise, that about does it.